Okay, great. How is that up there? Little higher? It's good? Levels are good? Okay, great. We're just doing a little tech check here right at the moment. Portland, Oregon lies within the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Oregon City Tumwater, Huatlala, and Clackamas Chinooks, and the Tualatin Kalapuya peoples who were relocated to the Grand Ronde Reservation under the Kalapuya, etc., 1855 ratified treaty, also known as the Willamette Valley Treaty, 1855. Today, these tribes are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and the Grand Ronde people continue to maintain a connection to their ancestral homelands and maintain their traditional cultural practices. Hello, I'm Garrick Matane, chair of the MFA Visual Studies program here at PNCA. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for being here, joining us for the fall 2025 lecture series. Next month, on Monday, November 10th, we'll welcome Los Angeles-based artist Cara Levine, again at 6 p.m. here in the Mediatek for a free artist lecture. By the way, can you all hear me in the back okay? Yeah? Okay, cool. There are a multitude of ways in which we can individually and collectively feel very stretched thin and pulled in different directions in this current moment. So I just want to recognize that and extend my appreciation for this turnout and all of you showing up and being here to spend your evening with us and hear from artist Isabelle Albuquerque. I also have to extend a big thank you to Libby Warble, the director and chief curator at the Lumber Room, who is presenting Isabelle's current exhibition with Louise Bourgeois. We're so grateful to have someone like Libby spearheading incredible programming in this city, someone who's not only incredibly accessible, thoughtful, humble, but very generous and kind. It's through the generosity of Libby, the entire Lumber Room staff, and of course the Miller Meigs collection that we're able to host tonight's lecture and bring artists like Isabelle to Portland. So thank you. And of course, Isabelle. Last week, Isabelle kindly met with our MFA students for a round of studio visits. Literally every single one of them came up to me afterward and raved about the experience. Your enthusiasm and spirit was really felt by the students and deeply appreciated. I encourage everyone to view Isabelle's current show at the Lumber Room, The Wandering Womb, which is, in quoting the release, explores the body as a site of memory, transformation, and original invention. The exhibition presents sculptures and drawings from 3 bodies of work by Albuquerque, known for casting her own body in materials such as bronze, resin, wood, and wax, as you can see here. The sculptural work draws upon mythological, feminist, and post-humanist vocabularies to claim the body as a site of collective liberation and evolutionary possibility. Also, as quoted, in her work, Albuquerque negotiates intimacy and scale, history and futurity, personal lineage, and female agency, deploying the body not as a spectacle, but as a site of radical multiplicity. It's in this statement of radical multiplicity that I'd like to sit for a moment. It feels poignant, again, in this current political dystopia, essentially, that we find ourselves in, and an accurate reflection of how I feel when looking at Isabelle's work. It feels expansive, disruptive. A few years back, in an interview which she curates, Isabelle shared that she has worked as an architect, a gardener, an AI database researcher, a businesswoman, an actor, a performer, a singer, a designer, a bookmaker. I know also you could add activist to the list. It goes on. And so it makes sense that there's a multiplicity of reads in the work to prevent any tendency to think of the female form or body as simply that, a singular object, a solid image, something reducible, something easily read and confined to myths, stories, and allegories serving a patriarchal worldview. Next month, Albuquerque will present a new series of sculptures at Nicodem in New York entitled Alien Spring, which centers the experience of women and their own connection to desire, sexuality, and embodiment. I can't wait. Please join me in welcoming Isabelle Albuquerque.
Thank you, Garrick. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I see some of the students and a lot of people who were at the opening. And if you didn't get a chance to go, please do. It's a very beautiful show. Libby and I have been working on it for a lot of the year, so I've been coming to Portland a lot and just really happy to be here. So thank you for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about the 3 bodies of work. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm going to be talking about the 3 bodies of work that are in The Wandering Womb: Orgy for 10 People in One Body, the Reliquary Series, and Alien Spring. Orgy for 10 People in One Body is a group of 10 headless human-scaled sculptures made between 2019 and 2022. In this series, I use my own body and transmute it across multiple material languages: the language of bronze, the language of plaster, the language of wood, the language of rubber, flock, memory, human hair, magic, and wax. In this work, I perform and subvert art historical narratives, mythology, and archetypes. We'll be going through it, but everything from Leda and the Swan to Romulus and Remus, Mary Magdalene, Venus, and the Wicked Witch of the West. Garrick kind of already spoke to this, but my work invites an acceptance of multi-beingness, non-chromonormativity, which is just like multiple timelines and different ways of thinking about time, transhumanism, multiplicity, metamorphosis, and a merge between self and other that transforms the body as a subject of shame and stigma into a force of collectivity, power, and love. And love is maybe the one that's most, I think, like taboo in the work. I don't think people talk about love a lot in art, and for me, it's a huge part of the work and what I'm working through. This work all began with a fire. Like Garrick said, I started doing sculpture pretty late. I was 36 years old. I was running a business doing AI and book design, and I was planning on having children. I was getting my body I was full of prenatals. I was like kind of getting ready to do that. And instead of doing that, I had 10 sculptural children. I really think of each of my sculptures as a child, and I kind of try and let them have a life of their own and listen to them and find who they are as I'm working on them. But in 2018, my family's home and studio, and my mom's studio, my sister's studio, all burned in the Wolsey fire. So I come from, I come from 3 generations of women artists. My great-grandmother was a Malouf singer from Tunisia, North Africa. She's here on the left, and she's holding my grandma there. And then in the middle slide is my grandma, who was an erotic playwright. She's in the black suit with her lover at the time in the 30s in Paris. And then my mom was a land artist. It is a land artist and total Renaissance woman. And we lost all the drawings, all the paintings, all the writing, all the records of this lineage of women. And so there was this real personal loss, but then it also so reflected a kind of silencing of women's voices through art history. And I really started making sculpture after that. After the fire, pretty much everything burned except for these 3 bronze heads. And I remember thinking I was really not into material before. I didn't really own anything. I did performance and things, but I really wasn't into objects. And I remember just seeing that bronze and being like, oh, it can survive a fire. It can survive through time. And I got really kind of fetishistic about material. So all the Orgy goes through those different materials that are kind of classical sculptural materials as a way to try and understand bronze like I understand my own hand, plaster like I understand my own legs, like every part of sculpture like I understand my own body. This is actually a piece of my mom's, and I bring it in because it's also kind of part of my birth story. So, as I said, she's a land artist, and this is a sculpture she did called the Red Pyramid. And it was done in 1980, and she used the Washington Monument as a kind of, I see this as like a really, she would speak about it differently, but I see it as her one erotic piece of art. And it's like this phallus that goes into these red triangles all over Washington, D.C., and works as a sundial. And before she started this work, she would call it a vision, and I think for me it's more like an inner voice. But she had a vision that said, you will meet a female force at the apex of a red triangle. And you'll see, don't have a mouse, but at the apex of that red triangle is my dad. And he was working at the NIH as a molecular biologist, and he volunteered to lay the pigment, and I was born a year later. So I tell that because I always think like my mom taught me how to trust my visions and how to really listen to those things that come through. And back to the fire, these are like her cameras. So we kind of lost, like, we didn't lose our vision, but we lost anything, all the material that held our visions, that held our storyline. So much of what was lost in the house changed my relationship to objects and the power they hold. It also changed my idea of the body, because all that was left of our history was what we held in our bodies. And a lot of this work is about information and history and how we carry it in our body. And at that time too, I could feel our collective relationships to our bodies changing too. So during the fire, I was working in AI, teaching in AI. Now we can do this all on our computers, but this was about 7 years ago. So me and my team built like an algorithm that I was training on pictures of nudes to teach it how to make nudes. And these are some of the nudes it made. And so to teach the AI, I kind of thought of myself as like the mother of the AI, and I had to show it. We didn't have public databases at the time. So for about a year and a half, I collected hundreds of thousands of images of nudes. And I've always loved them, but as we know, like the history of the female body is a history of objectification and ownership. And so I was kind of working through this, and I weirdly started making objects of women's bodies. And so I was like, this has always kind of been this, there's always this push and pull in the work, like what is that? And I wanted to see, I think because I was kind of thinking in computer vision at the time, I wasn't really I was looking for patterns, and I was thinking, like, was there a way that you could have in art a subject-subject relationship as opposed to a subject-object relationship? So a lot of times I think people think my work is like against the male gaze, but I don't really gender gaze. It's more like, is there a way to, I guess, open up the way that you're looking? Oh yeah, so this is the On Sakri Lovers. It's one of the first erotic artworks, and it's over 11,000 years old, and it was created during a time when there was like a big climatic change, and people started going from being nomadic to farmers. And because of that, moving into a more domestic life, they started making these erotic objects. And this is this couple that's, entwined in each other, but every angle you look at it, it looks like a phallus, it looks like a vagina, it looks like a man, it looks like a woman. That's what I kind of love about sculpture, is every aspect, it's never static. Every perspective you look at it, it changes. And I thought we were going through an equally big change with AI, and now I think we're all living that, but at the time I was really concerned, I think, and just thinking about how this would change our body. Like, was I going to be the last generation that would have a corporal experience like this or have a sensual experience? So I wanted to really capture that experience. I was also, when I first started the Orgy, I had, as Garrick said, I had been working as a musician, and I love music for 18 musicians, piano trio in E-flat major, and Orgy for 10 people in one body was going to be a musical project. And I was imagining 10 different instruments that would phase so that all the notes, I always call it like making babies. If you've ever listened to Steve Reich, like when A and B come, they make another note. And so that ended up translating into a more material language, partially out of, I got the saxophone for the composition for the musical show, and I was playing with it in my studio, and I wrote the artist Math Bass, who actually introduced me to the Lumber Room and to Libby and to Sarah. And I was like, I love this saxophone. I'm making this performance, but I kind of want to make a sculpture out of it. And they said, well, why don't you do both? So that became kind of the mantra of the Orgy: do both, and then and. So the first sculpture we'll talk about is in the show, and it is the first sculpture of the Orgy, and the first sculpture I ever showed. I made sculpture for a long time before I showed it publicly. I started like around 2016 when Trump was first elected, and I was working in my office at 4 a.m. in the public bathroom and just like making phalluses and cutting them, and I was really angry. So I made like this really angry work, and then I destroyed it, and then I started making like an army of love, and that was the Orgy. the first sculpture is a recreation of Leda and the Swan. Leda and the Swan is a Greek myth in which Zeus embodies a swan and is said to have either raped or seduced Queen Leda, who later lays 2 eggs, one being Helen of Troy. It is Helen of Troy who is said to have started the Trojan Wars, where so much of classical art history begins. And so we begin the history of Western art with a rape or a seduction, or so we begin with both. So the beginning of the orgy was like a looking at this question of violence against women and how do we hold that with our power. And I'm going to be so bold to read you a Yeats poem, which is from the perspective of Leda. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed by the dark webs, her nape caught in his bill. He holds her helpless breast upon his breast. How can those terrified, vague fingers, the feathered glory from her loosened thighs? And how can body laid in that white rush, but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? A shudder in the loins engendered there, the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead, being so cut up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? And in my version of Leda and the Swan, she does, and she takes the power on for herself. So I symbolize the swan with a saxophone, and the saxophone beak is the swan's beak. And I thought maybe if I could like disassemble the saxophone, there's many versions of this where there were multiple pieces of saxophone, but I thought if I could disassemble the saxophone, maybe I could somehow like disassemble like the history of the nude and make kind of a feral timeline where women had agency, where women were representing their own bodies, where the work we saw came not from a gaze that was outside onto the body, but from a gaze that was inside out of the body. So I guess I should show, you saw that piece before, but this is the piece. And she's like playing the saxophone with her pussy, but it's also an extension of her body. It becomes her phallus. She's making music with like this phallus that is either entering her or coming out of her. And so through that, I was thinking a lot through, there's a way that sculpture can really hold like multiple genders at once too. And I was thinking about Bernini's Hermaphroditus, about Egyptian sculptures where women have to change to men and then back to women again in order to get into the afterlife. And I too went through kind of, in all these pieces, I go through like many transmutations of the body. So it started with my body that I worked with a group of wonderful women to mold and cast. That's the kind of leftover stuff. This is Sarah Sitkin, who I worked with on the first 6 sculptures of the orgy. And I always like to say, like, we think there's such a myth of like the artist doing things all alone all the time, and that's not. I do that a lot in the beginning. Like at the beginning of a process, I have a rehearsal process where I find the gestures and find the positions really. But after that, it's goes through so many hands. Like every one of the sculptures have been touched by many hands. And I always love, like, in traditional African art, especially in sacred art, that was a big part of it, that it wasn't made by one hand. Sometimes it says anonymous, but it's often really many who made the work. And so Sarah was a big part of making this work, and I just adore her. This is her here. This is the wax, who I work with a man named Martin on. This is at the foundry, the cauldron, the sculpture hanging upside down. And oh yeah, this is a quote that I think really speaks to that transmutation too. Transition is always a relief. Destination means death to me. If I could figure out a way to remain forever in transition, in the disconnect and familiar, I could remain in a state of perpetual freedom. And I think when I was making the orgy, I thought, like, if I was never static, that somehow I would be free. And yeah, this is the final piece. I have my hand on my breast in this piece. A lot of this work was working through. I had a kind of unusual body where I had like one side was more male and one side was more female, and I got a surgery when I was younger, and I had one breast. So I had, before doing this work, been a total never nude and kind of shut down. So I went through like a really erotic period when I was 36 making this work, and it was kind of the first time for me. So, and it's continued to have that kind of experience ever since. But a lot of it was working through like a body that maybe has multiplicity even physically and internally. And sculpture is such a good way to work through these kind of ideas. And this is the piece at the Lumber Room right now, with Louise Bourgeois behind it. And these are her from her Insomnia series. And this is called All Five. And the circles represent all 5 members of her family. And I just love having number 1 singing up to these drawings. The next sculpture is Orgy for 10 People in One Body 2. This sculpture was made. I started making the drawings for this about a month after the fire, and my sister had been pregnant when she was living at the house, and I was at her birth, and I was supposed to be the birth photographer. So I was like really trying to capture her, and she's a dancer and very comfortable in her body, and she was, and I still see it, and it really did influence the orgy. She was in every single position, all over the room, in all her power, completely transforming. Like her cervix was going from here to here, and that was just blew me away to the point that I was a total disaster at the birth. Didn't get very good documentation, but ended up working on this next sculpture, number 2, which is, I guess I should have, it's a birth position and a death position. And I was thinking a lot about Pompeii. This is one of the people found there in this same position. This is when I started doing scanning. I started thinking I would do all casts, but the years that I made the Orgy 2019 to 2023 are pretty specific for us all. They were, and Sarah and I we tried to stay 6 feet away from each other the whole time we were making it. We built this like big scanning rig where we could be 6 feet away from each other, and this is one of the images from that. The candle is hand cast in a kind of memento mori, reminding us of the preciousness of life and the tradition of Sephardic women lighting candles to keep the spirit of life going. This pose is a sexual pose and also a birth pose. I guess I already said all this. I'll say it again. 1 month after the fires, my sister, who is also an artist, gave birth to her son. I was with her during this experience, and the drawing for this sculpture came directly out of witnessing the birth of her child. And you'll see here on the right is a Louise Bourgeois book where I did the first drawing for number 2, because I've always, I think as probably everyone in this room, just loved her. Gerhard Richter's candle. This beautiful painting by Marlene Dumas of a prostitute doing like a candle trick. And this also kind of incorporates in the Bernini bed. And what I love about that Bernini, sorry for the flash, about the Bernini Hermaphroditus is he sculpted this bed, but the sculpture is ancient. So it's like multiple time frames all smashed into one. And that's another really kind of incredible thing about sculpture. I mean, we still have this work, we can look at it. It's both hundreds and thousands of years old at the same time. And there's a way that it can hold time. I guess that is just regulating for me, especially when things seem to be moving so fast. When you can see multiple time scales in one object, it kind of, it opens up what life can be. Okay, let me get back to where I was. The sculpture also makes these stalagmites of time, and I always love like this Murakami with the cum that comes out like in 1 second, and I love that expression of cum. But I also love like what I would think of as a more feminine expression, which is it's very, very slow, and it like drips over time. And the idea with this piece was that it would fill the whole gallery with the cum, but it'd probably take about 1,000 years. And I love that idea of time too. The next sculpture is Orgy for 10 People in One Body 3, and this is done in walnut. And this I'm going to read. This is a passage from my book, and which is also a passage from my diary. And sometimes when I'm trying to get to like the meaning of the work, I go into a you voice, and it helps me to like access it. And I always recommend that other artists do it because it can really help you like understand what you're doing when you talk to yourself. So that's where this part will be coming from. So you get a little bit of that part of the process. A lot of my work starts with like poetry or language, my own and other people's, which you'll see throughout this. So this is one way to access through language the sculpture. You went to the property where the house had burned down and began digging through the ash. You thought you would find a tree trunk from which to carve a body, the third sculpture in the orgy. You didn't find one but in the ash, but you kept looking. You looked at sculpture everywhere, in books, in museums, on the internet, throughout time, and your eyes kept resting on those carved from walnut. Walnut warm like skin, walnut soft like skin, the seasons of the tree's life embedded within its bark, within its rings, the life of the tree told through a line drawing across its surface. And you guys all live among the trees, so you're so familiar with, I just love a body that tells you its whole story. And the tree does. You can see how old it is. You can see where there was less water. You can see where it was hurt. And so whenever I work with wood, I work with fallen wood, and most of the materials I try to do as least murder as possible, but not always possible. But I always feel like I'm working with another body. And what's cool about that too is like when you a piece like this, you start with a block, you have no idea what's inside, and the two bodies so often just poetically speak to each other. Like this breast with the rings on it, I couldn't have planned that. You're carving from a block, but that kind of stuff happens all the time when you're working with wood. You wanted to make a sculpture that held both shame and power and carve it out of walnut. You covered your pussy and your breast with your hands. The finger of the hand covering your pussy slipped from a position of protection to one of power. The finger slipped inside yourself, and you captured this reaching towards ecstasy in a 3D scan. So what's kind of unique about this sculpture is that the fingers do go inside the body. I was thinking a lot about like Mapplethorpe's fisting photographs, Doubting Thomas, and like different like moments in art that kind of like go like that in your head where you go right through space. It's the three-dimensional, and sometimes that's represented in 2D, but to me that's sculpture. Like you can, you go right through it. So that's part of this sculpture too. You can see in the scan the fingers going in, and all this work is really intimate. So again, like working with Sarah and working with other people, like a lot of conversations come up when you're making it, and that was really scary and hard at first. It's a lot easier now, but it was a big part of making the work too, is like, how do you bring other people into these really private moments? Walnut, waterfall, Venuses. I still do have like the database researcher in me, so every sculpture usually has thousands of others around it. And I don't really think of any sculpture as singular. Like I can't really look at any work of art without seeing like all the other ones it's connected to, or even a body without seeing all the other bodies it's connected to. Venus has many. You manipulated the scan and made your body smaller, half its normal size, so that you could see it in one glance, so that you could try and make sense of it. You found a 100-year-old tree that had fallen along the Oregon coast. You worked with a robot to carve it. This is the CNC robot carving the wood. This is the final piece. The 100-year-old body merged with your then 38-year-old body, human body, through the assistance of an 8-year-old robotic arm. Old woman, middle-aged woman, child. Number 3 became a trinity. So again, it's like this merging of time into one body. And then those are the 3 sculptures that are most related to the show here, but I'm also going to talk about Orgy for 10 People in One Body 5, the deer. And this is a sculpture that it's like most connected with other people, which is one of the reasons I'm showing it. And I remember when I first started thinking about this, I was like, oh, a deer woman, now you're really getting dumb, you know? And I was like, go for it. And I did, and I am so happy I did, because she really took on a life of her own. Like, she has multiple relationships with people I don't know, and like a whole kind of other life online, and memes, and a whole thing, which was sometimes when you go to that, my mom calls it the theory of the obvious. Like, the thing that's the most obvious or dumb to you is sometimes like also the truest across the board, or maybe not obvious to everyone else. This is a sample from making the fur pattern. So it's a process that some of you guys have probably done called flocking. And I was thinking about like each strand of hair, like a stroke of paint, like the thinnest. I actually remember asking Math, I was like, how do you paint like the tiniest little strokes of hair? And she's like, just a really thin paintbrush. And then I was like, why even use a paintbrush? Why not just use like a synthetic hair? So all the hair here is painted on in these patterns. And one of the most beautiful things about a deer is so much, I think, of the body is about hiding it, right? And a deer hides in light, and I love that idea, especially a baby deer. Like the patterns on her is the patterns of dappled light, so that when she's in the grasses, you can't see her. And I love the idea of hiding in light, which is a little bit what the orgy is like. Like, it's so public and private at once. And all the hair, or the colors of the hair here, are the colors of Griffith Park, which is the big park in Los Angeles, at sunset, or what, magic hour at the end of summer. And to me, that's like the most romantic, loving time. So I really wanted her to be able to camouflage into those grasses. And doing this sculpture, some of the sculptures in the orgy, like, I would really go into kind of a method acting thing. So like I lived with deers, I slept in caves, ate only deer food. I really tried to like become the deer before doing the scan. And a lot of the work is like that. There's like a lot of process and ritual that happens around the work. And I think you can feel that. Like, I don't think any of that's wasted. I think you feel it in the final work. So the first thing I did was get these like great cosplay hooves. Of course, I was thinking about Bambi and Tyrus Wong, who I think of as like the quintessential LA artist. And he was a Chinese immigrant who lost his mother when he first came to America, and then went to Disney and really, made Bambi. He's the one who drew all the first drawings. And I think of Bambi as the first like large-scale environmental film. There's that, the whole thing is almost silent, and there's one scene where little Bambi comes after the fire, runs out and asks the dad, what happened? And the dad says, man came to the forest. And that's like the only lines in the whole film. And it's just so moving. So I was thinking about Bambi a lot. And then this is the first sculpture. In all the sculptures, they're all wearing wedding rings, but in the other ones, they're all molded in. And then from the deer on, they're my actual wedding ring. And I think this is partially part of the subjectivity. People always get a little like strange about the ring because it represents so many different things to so many different people. And I think it gives the sculptures like a life of their own outside. You can imagine, they're married, they have this thing going on, like what's happening. And it's also just been like, for me, it's kind of a devotion to art. Like, I go to the place where I got my wedding ring made, and I've made, the orgy has 5 editions of each piece, so there's 50 pieces in the end. So the guy that I get the ring thing is always like, Isabelle, you're getting married again. and I do feel like I'm kind of remarrying the work again and again too. So the ring is a symbolic thing. And these nails too are made from ebony bark. And then the hooves of the deer, no one ever notices that they're horse hooves. And I always think about my first sculpture when I was younger. My aunt had a foundation where she would save horses from slaughterhouses, and it was my job to soak like all the horses' feet in Epsom salt and like keep them safe. Because for a horse, if your hooves are not good, if they shoot lame horses. So I was constantly working on the feet, and feet come up a lot in my work. We store so much trauma there. They're sculpturally so interesting. And it's really when I first started working with form was with these horse hooves. So I think that's why they showed up in this sculpture. Deer hooves are much more cloven. Well, I think we've covered that, but that comes up a lot. And then this is the final, the first show I did where I showed all 10 works together. And then this is a quote, another David Wojnarowicz quote, I just love him, that I only read later on in the Orgy, but I really do feel encapsulates a lot of it. Inside my head, I wished for years that I could separate into 10 different people. This is the part about love. To give each person I loved a part of myself forever, and also have some left over to drift across landscapes, and maybe even to go into death, or areas that were deadly, and have enough of me to survive the death of one or two of me. That was what I thought was appropriate for all my desires. And I never figured out how to rearrange it all, and now I'm in danger of losing the only one of me that is around. And then the next body of work, it kind of goes into, it's the reliquaries, and I realize now that they really are about loss. And I started these in 2023. I'll read this. I began the reliquary series as well as lockdown ended, and we collectively started emerging out of the pandemic. Like the medieval reliquaries before them, these are objects of contemplation that offer a link between life and death, humanity and nature, and connection across divides. When making the reliquary works, I had been thinking about the texts of mystics and saints, but also about contemporary sculpture like Paul Tech's technology reliquaries, where, like I do, he used casts of the body in sculptures that contain, hold, honor, life, love, and their inedible companion, loss. The technologies in my reliquaries are inspired by the intelligence of nature and other emergent systems, as well as an attempt to put into form an idea and a belief that the poet Ross Gray so eloquently puts, we all belong to each other. This piece is called Suicide Watch, and it was a pretty heavy time in 2023. And I think a lot of us, there wasn't a lot of space to talk about it, or we kind of just moved on. So I wanted to make these objects that were small enough that they could go into people's houses, and they could kind of like put the stuff in there and go on, get out of the house and go on living, but also have a place to kind of hold like the actual loss of lives, the loss of people's minds, all different things that were happening at that time and continue to happen. Suicide Watch is made of bronze and a ticking watch. The watch around the ankle of the foot speaks to death as a release from the shackles of time. Death, the way it is described in the last stanza of Robert Lowell's poem Withdrawal, as when the wristwatch is taken from the wrist. The surface of the bronze is painted in brilliant colors by fire. It's a fire patina, which I'll talk about later. These colors are the result of a process that both destroys and renews simultaneously. The claw that is bursting through the foot's pinky toe is sharp as a knife. And I often will incorporate in, especially in the more handheld sculptures, like a weapon, because I always imagine that if you need it, you got it. Like it's a sculpture and it might be holding your pain, but it also could protect you. So if you ever need that, they're there. This is another foot reliquary, and this one actually has a place that you can take the top off and put whatever you want inside. And one of my dear friends has put the ashes of someone they love inside this sculpture. So it's being used in a really beautiful way. The surface of the fallen beast's foot feels almost moonlit, and its topology is formed from the pressure of my fingers, which imprint along its veins. The foot opens at the top of the ankle and has a void space within it to hold whatever the beholder needs holding. And when I first gave it to this is a friend who owns this piece, I put her hair in it, and she's now replacing it with these ashes, so it can change what goes inside. And this is Reliquary for Tenderness. Oh, at one time it was called Reliquary with Hive. Reliquary for Tenderness is made of a human hand cast in bronze that grows an apple tree leaf from its pinky and a beehive from its wrist. The work is a meditation on the idea that we all belong to one another. It began with a quote from Hafiz, "I have come into this world to see this, the sword drop from men's hands, even at the height of their arc of anger, because we have finally realized that there is just one flesh to wound." And in these works, it extends the flesh from just the human to also the animal world. So I started really incorporating in like bodies that were growing plants or that had a hive or some relationship to other intelligent systems. This is first head. And this is when I started like drawing directly into wax before making bronzes, which I highly recommend doing. It's really wonderful. And this is head with tongue. And I think with these, I still have these in the reliquary series, but they're kind of branching out, and the tongue is like a listener or an antenna and kind of feeling its way through the world through sense. And I guess that's also was connected to that time when we were reconnecting to our senses and like able to feel the world again. This is fallen limb. Fallen limb is made of bronze, cupric nitrate, and the heart of a fallen Aleppo pine. Aleppo pine, also known as Jerusalem pine, contains a fluid within its sap that can treat burns and wounds. When making this work, I was listening to a conversation between the poets Ariana Reines and the Palestinian poet Gaeth Alemanhans on repeat, and especially in Gaeth's piece, which begins, "We who are strewn about in fragments." It's a really beautiful poem called We. I'm not going to read it today because it's kind of intense, but I highly recommend it. And I was thinking about fallen bodies and fallen trees, and we're seeing this imagery all the time, and I was trying to like find some kind of hope in it and imagining that maybe they could grow up together, like the two bodies could merge. And I was thinking about women and children and the myth of Daphne, who was hunted, and when she was hunted, she transformed into a tree. And really, a lot of the work is about like, how do we transform in order to survive this moment? And yeah, so then as I was working on this work, another fire came. I had moved my studio and house to a place right outside of Altadena called Sierra Madre. And my whole thing there is I was like dating this mountain. And I still live there, and my house is fine, and I love this mountain. So I'd spent months just like hiking in the mountain, getting to know every flower, every tree. Like I really dated her. She didn't care about me at all, but I had a great time with her. And then the fire came, and this is when Alien Spring, my newest body of work, started blossoming. Livy and I had just started talking about the show at Lumber Room and how we might respond to Louise Bourgeois's work in the collection. I had started psychoanalysis to get into the headspace of Louise, and Libby showed me this image of Depression Woman, and this is one of the pieces in the show at Lumber Room. I started dreaming and imagining a meadow growing in the ash around my studio and all around Louise's Depression Woman. And these are some of the drawings I started drawing at the time of like these flowers kind of growing out of the ash and growing out of bodies. And a lot of these works are in the show. And some of them have human body parts and the veins that are from scans of my body with that go into the roots, and a lot of them are uprooted. And then this is all work that's in process now. So the first two sculptures from Alien Spring are at the Lumber Room now. And I won't speak them too much. Usually the language kind of comes after the work is done, and I'm really in it now. But I wanted to show you some images. I was at the Foundry pretty much every day thinking about the flowers, and they did start growing up from the ash. Like the whole mountain is covered in flowers now. And I was thinking about pregnant woman and about torso. And I started making these flowers that like were making out and that were just like totally entwined and in love. And this is a mother and child sculpture, very much related to Louise's pregnant woman. And at Lumber Room, you'll see these two sculptures facing each other. And then that's the first lovers. That's also at the show, where there's this like, it's the first time I've ever made a sculpture that touches another sculpture. And you might not have noticed, but all the others are really lonely. So for me, it was like, it's this huge breakthrough of the touch actually happening in the sculpture, not just the longing for it. And that's it. And I really want to do questions. if you have any questions, let us know.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'll just go ahead and, just so people can hear it, and also for the live stream, pass the mic around to anybody who has questions for Isabelle.
Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing. You were talking just now about how the language for you comes later, past like the actual creation process. When you experience, do you make notes as you go, or is it something that you like hold off on until the end to figure out how you want to articulate it? Is it something that comes to you in the same kind of like, I don't want to say like vision, but like similarly as your inspiration for the pieces themselves? Or is it something that you like struggle to articulate? I ask that as someone that often struggles to articulate their work.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different kinds of writing, right? There's the writing of the work. So every morning I have a kind of weird thing where I wake up at 4 a.m. and I just write and write. Not a weird, a lot of people do it. And I write and write and write and write. And then I draw, and then I'll get into clay. So that kind of writing is always there, like the stuff coming through. But then how I talk about the work, I mean, the meaning constantly changes. Like the Orgy today is a completely different thing than it was in 2019, to the point that it often leaves me speechless. Like I don't know what even to say in the way that it's changing. So that is something I more in the brain. You know, I'll do to the side, really think about a way to make it accessible for other people. But that changes so much, and I struggle with it too. And sometimes you just don't want to say anything at all, so people can bring their own thing to it. That's the hope, but like also try and give a little bit to, you know, to give an access point. I think that's how I think about that kind of writing. Like, how can there be like something someone can hold on to so it can open up bigger for them?
Hi, thank you. I'm really interested in your process for artistic research. Could you talk a little bit more about that and maybe how that data analytics side kind of comes into it?
Well, they're all a little different. I mean, sometimes I will like start with an image. So like this, for example, I don't know if you're probably familiar with Andrew Wyeth's Christina's World. This is like directly from that. So a lot of times I'm doing dance. My sister's a dancer, so I work with her a lot to find like a position that looks like a metaphor. But in this case, it's just straight Christina's World. And, you know, it's one of the most famous, beloved. I love cliche. Most people don't, and I find it really hard to work with because it's so heavy. Like Christina's World, you know? But it's we all relate to it for a reason. And you know, I don't know if you know, but Christina, her whole body, I think of her as like a superhero. She had muscular dystrophy, like her muscles didn't work, so she dragged herself through Andrew Wyeth's town, and she couldn't walk. So when you see that image of her looking up at the house, like the quintessential kind of American reclining woman, her arms are so strong like that because that's how she carried herself through town. So I think like a lot of times it's looking at something that's a cliche, like a witch or whatever it is, and like trying to just follow it and follow it and follow it and follow it until it leads to like why it sparked the first person. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. I kind of had a question about some of your like titling choices. If you could just maybe speak about that, because I noticed you said like one piece had like a change in name, and like do you find that the titles of your works change with time, or do you get like a really clear, does it just depend on the piece kind of?
It kind of depends. Like Orgy for 10 People in One Body, I wrote that on my wall and I was like, that's going to be my life for the next 5 years. But I had no idea what it was. So then it was like dismantling what does it mean to have an orgy for 10 people in one body? I'm still figuring that out. The one you saw, it was called Reliquary for Tenderness, and I changed it to Reliquary with Hive to make it less tender and to make it less vulnerable, and then I changed it back. So sometimes I'll get scared. I usually do like have the title, but then maybe I'll I'll do something a little more less vulnerable, and then I often go back to it.
Hi. Sorry. I would love to hear more about your perspective on the life of your works. You talk about the time you spend with them and then when they're being touched and formed by other people, but I'm curious, how do you think about them now that they're living in these galleries or in other people's homes and spaces?
Well, it's interesting. I had a group to the studio recently, and the teacher was like, the question she asked was like, how do you control how the message of your work gets out there? And, you know, with my work, it can go a lot of ways. Like it can, and it has. And I kind of have learned to like that's kind of what I mean, like with mothering. Like you wouldn't ever tell your kid how to be. You would just allow them to be who they are, even if it's wrong, you know? So I try and like let them have a life of their own. They live in a commercial market. They're in like really rich people's houses and places that are closed off. So I hope one day I have an AP of all the work. I hope one day I'll be able to have it in a public place. But like when you're in this world, you're in a conversation with violence, like every step of the way. So you kind of have to, I guess that's what I mean. You let it have a life of its own in like bringing tons of life to it, so it can have some. It can exist in these places and bring something else, but you also have to come to terms with that a little bit.
Hello. I'm curious if you can speak to the absence of feet in some work, or like in this work there are feet, sometimes it's hooves, sometimes there's no head, sometimes there's a hole where the head would be. Here you have a beautiful spiral going on. Can you speak to that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the headlessness is something that like a lot of different people have a lot of different interpretations of. I remember, as I was saying, it was in 2016 during Me Too, and I kept hearing this thing like on the internet, but even friends saying it. They would, people were starting to talk about these traumas they'd have, and I kept hearing this expression, which was like, yeah, this happened, this happened, this happened, and I just laughed my head off. And that was the response. And I was like, I was really taken by that. So it kind of started there, but it's moved all over. There's like this Bataillean idea of when you take away the head, you take away the power and you make a more disseminated power, which I really wanted that to be in the orgy. When you take away the head, the power of the body comes out, the part that like is supposed to not be powerful. I also like that when you put a head, it's me, like it's real clear. But when it's not, like men would relate to the work, like all different kinds of people see themselves in the work. And I think like not having a head allows you to kind of enter into the body, and having the pieces that have like a spiral or a hole, they become something that like many people can enter in and out of.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming out tonight and speaking to us. It's so clear how each piece that you've shown tonight is so conceptually rich, Isabelle, and they're visually fascinating. I wanted to ask about, our host mentioned that you're clearly an activist. Throughout your talk tonight, you mentioned points of environmentalism. You were listening to a Palestinian poet. Obviously, things about queer and gender relations, etc., permeate your pieces. And I wanted to hear you speak a little bit more to that. What does activism look like in your life, and how does it relate to your role as an artist?
Yeah, it's such a tough one, right? Because you don't want your work to, I never want my work to have like a message. I always think like, for me, it's not about that. But how do I answer this? I guess I'm still thinking about it. Even when you said activist, I was like, am I? Because I do it in a really different way, and I do it in a way that I think is the most powerful way I can do it, but it's not really with language. It's through an image, and I hope it's working that way, but I don't put language to it. And I don't even really know how I feel about that or if that's going to change, but that's how I've been most powerful to this point, and I found that that is like my best way to use that so far.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question here.
This is a little broad, but I feel like you mentioned like transhumanism a couple times in this. Could you just talk a little bit more about like what that means to you and how it shows up in your work?
Yeah, I think a lot of the, I mean, here's, this piece is like in this hybrid place between a human and a cat, right? She has 8 nipples, she has all this fur. There's a lot of the work is like, I think it was also because I was thinking about AI a lot and like where might the body go in the future, where might it go in the past, and also a lot of the work is about like kind of getting rid of boundaries. So that just, I find in the work it often merges with animals, plants. It's not so future oriented usually. It's almost like, the first paintings are of humans with horse heads and things. It's kind of basic. Transhumanism seems futuristic, but it's really more of like a breaking down of boundaries between the human world, between all the different realms that we see having boundaries between them. I don't really see them that way. They always seem merged to me. So that kind of just naturally comes out in the work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.